So, Jim, I feel it's a bit of an honor to be sitting here talking to such a legend. I really do. Someone who's been centrally involved in Agile and the whole history of software development for such a long time. We've got some time this afternoon, and I'd like really to just jump into it, to go right to the core and ask you to summarize. If you look at all of the Agile stuff, all of what you understand to be Agile, try and pull out one or two ideas which you think have stood the test of time.
All right, great. No, and I really appreciate the opportunity, and I've enjoyed our discussions and a lot of the shared perspectives leading up to this. So I'm looking forward to today too.
So what do you think?
I think that's the most difficult kind of question to answer for a lot of reasons. I mean, number one, I think the manifesto is much less important for what it actually says than for what it is. So, I mean, these guys were smart. They said, okay, we're gonna make a manifesto, which has this revolutionary tone to it. And it called attention to people that, hey guys, we as an industry suck. We need to do something. We have seen a better way. And I think it just got people seeking for a better way. And I mean, if we look at what people call Agile today, very little of it, in fact, has to do with the Agile Manifesto, which I think is a sign that it's not so much the manifesto itself. So I think its biggest success was that we had a lot of talking heads who got together and were able to all sign their name to one thing, which people associated with a name called Agile, and then everyone kind of co-opted that name to mean what they thought it should mean. In terms of the benefit, even if we could parameterize this, I really don't think we know, because I mean, I looked around. There's very few good measures of whether Agile is any better than anything else, or whether software today is better than it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago. My own personal experience as someone who's been doing software since the late 1960s is, we're basically at about the same place we were then. There have been a lot of improvements. Most of them have been in hardware, and most of them have been in performance. And by the way, I think that was one of the major enablers of Agile, is that we had personal computers. So people could now make decisions independently. And as Ward Cunningham says, never trust a computer you can't unplug from the wall. This is what enabled what a lot of people associate with Agile, like test-driven development and working alone. Now, I think people associate those with Agile, but they're definitely not advantages. I mean, I speak often about the traps of test-driven development and the research that shows that it's really harmful to your architecture. And we know that teamwork works. We know this a lot from the lean tradition and the things coming out of Toyota and out of the Toyota production system that Scrum has adopted. And by the way, Scrum had adopted these 8 years before the Agile Manifesto. So, I mean, the Agile Manifesto was just observing that maybe some of these things were working.
I'd just like to go back and pick up on one thing you said there a minute, if I may. So you said that we don't really have good metrics to properly assess whether software development today is quantifiably and clearly better than what was the case, 2001. Now, I've got a couple of friends who work in the consulting space. One of those people made a point to me, which I thought was very good. He said, well, we don't need to take the quality of software development in the organization from a particular level up to 100% in one go. All we need to do is show that we've actually improved it a little bit. Because
I agree.
So my question is, do you think it's got better at all, or could you argue that it really hasn't?
My argument would be that it really hasn't, but I mean, that's kind of a long dogleg. And I think it would take a long time to explain, basically from the perspective of my experience, or kind of A/B comparisons of, telecom 30 years ago versus telecom today, or making a flight reservation 30 years ago versus making a flight reservation today. I think the actual quality of the service has seriously degraded. And some of it has to do with software practice. Some of it has to do just with the fact that we as consumers are being asked to do more and more of the work that used to be done by people behind the desk. So, I mean, I used to be able to make a flight reservation when I was working in Bell Labs by just calling up the flight desk, and it took 3 minutes. I want to go there. I want to go on this date. I want to come on this date, and poof, the rest. Now I need to book an airline, which takes 20 minutes. I need to book a hotel. I need to get my rental car. I need to do all these things. Because industries have been pushing things back, and software has become the instrument by which we've been able to push things back to the consumer. Every once in a while, someone will take an interest in automation. Most of these things cannot be automated, or if they are, they're annoying. But in terms of the actual software development, which is looking at it from the inside, I go to conferences these days, and I hear people talking about the things they've put together. And I mean, a typical talk at a conference. I was at a conference here in Denmark. It was wonderful. We had a real conference here about a month ago with real people and everything in a real room. And I mean, I counted the technologies that this guy was using, and he was giving a talk on his small contribution to this amalgam of 20 different technologies to support what he was doing on the web. And I mean, I've always been one to kind of sling my own HTML, and I thought, I mean, there's no way this is going to be scalable to any kind of development culture that's going to be able to master this stuff and make reasonable use of it. So I mean, frameworks which are viewed as the great harbinger of reuse and a great solution, and in fact, I think have slowed us down. But that's a long story. In terms of the actual agile kinds of things, working with end users, doing testing, being attentive to quality, being attentive to code quality. I mean, Rich Gabriel, who's, the CLOS guy and Lisp guy, says, oh, heck, the Lisp people were doing this in the 1950s and 1960s. And it was basically, the big IBMs of the 1960s who destroyed this by putting it under a management umbrella where they managed software the same way they were managing hardware manufacturing. And now it's taken us 40 years to recover from that. But, we've known how to do this all along. If anything, I think the big takeaway is this notion of self-management, where the teams, instead of waiting for a direction that's coming down from some machine, from some pipeline, are able to make decisions much closer to where the decisions have effect. Now, in some cases, that's gone too far. I think management has a valuable point in doing what the Japanese call kaikaku, managing the enterprise, managing partnerships and things. And too often we forget about that. And we've built this wall between management and development. And too often the developers don't get close enough to the end user. We're going to talk about the Agile Manifesto. I mean, it talks about customers. There is no customer, for example, in Scrum. The customer is a handoff between the developer and the end user. No, I mean, I want to be able to deal with end users. And the Agile community is very, very bad about this. And I mean, if you go to a UX conference or talk to the UX people, they say, oh, you're an Agile person, you're one of those. And they just laugh at us.
Right. Because
the whole Agile set of memes does not understand what the UX people understand. These things that come from psychology and observation and close relationship with end users.
To what extent do things like design thinking, that's like a mindset or a way of conceptualizing the design process and executing it, to what extent do those, which technically are part of the Agile arena, but not the manifesto, address points like that, do you think?
I would disagree that design thinking is under the Agile umbrella. Certainly, if you talk to people from from the design movement. I mean, the design movement was this movement in the 1980s from people like John Thakera and Christopher Alexander was one of them too, which was kind of moving from the modernistic school of design, which had kind of controlled a lot of society and art up to that point, into a postmodern world. And what we call design thinking today is kind of a weak echo of that movement from the 1980s. There's some wonderful, wonderful literature, design literature from that era, design after modernism.
This is actually a very interesting point, a really important one. If you look at the sort of the way the design process was conceptualized at that early stage, the best quality thinking, and you deconstructed it, and you looked at the design thinking stuff today coming out of Stanford and places, is there any new thinking there at all? It's a question.
I mean, well, first of all, I try to ignore a lot of it because I've done a lot of immersion in this older literature, and it makes a lot of sense. And by the way, you find a lot of it in what people popularly ascribe to Agile. In getting feedback, because you can't understand requirements up front. And there is emergence, and you need to get into this. So this is one of the big things that came out of the design movement in the 1980s. And this again is why the self-management component of Agile is so important. Is that, and it's funny because the Agile people got it entirely wrong, and the Agile Manifesto got it wrong. It says, "Oh, those silly users, those nasty users, they keep changing their requirements." And I go around and I ask my clients will say this, and I'll say, "Well, what requirement changed?" Requirements don't change. It's very, very rare. It happens, okay? What changes is the development team's understanding of the requirements, or sometimes even end users' understanding of the requirements. And that's about communication and about feedback and things like prototyping, which again, we see in the current design movement, that is one of the good things. So we're seeing things like set-based design that Google is doing, or we're doing a lot of emphasis on prototyping. These are really great signs of the design of this design thinking that comes out of this design movement in the 1980s.
I love that idea. That's a new idea for me. So what you're saying is that the requirements in a particular problem situation are latent. They're almost like a Platonistic. They exist, but they haven't been discovered yet. And the issue is
to
our
a large
ability.
degree. Yes.
Right. And that would explain why Apple's able to build products that no one was asking for, because the requirements were latent all the time. And it took someone to come along and identify them.
I've often wondered, and I really credit Steve Jobs personally for having a really excellent set of filters. So I think in Apple, a lot of people will have great ideas and they filter up to Steve Jobs, and he's just there with a fly swatter. And every once in a while, he'll see one that says, "Oh wow, this resonates right." And I just think he had this wonderful set of filters and this wonderful intuition about what to support and take forward. So yeah, he was the product owner for the iPhone. I don't think it was his idea; it came up the ranks. But yeah, he recognized this latent requirement.
So if you look at the Agile Manifesto, and I think we're agreeing, we're saying this is actually a really important part of the process. Cutting to the core of the process. How efficient are you identifying those latent requirements? What part of the Agile Manifesto crystallizes that point, do you think, most?
The only thing that I can find, that's kind of in black and white is individuals and interactions over processes and tools. The Agile Manifesto is one set of rules. And one of the things that concerns me about it is it's missing this kind of meta object protocol that says, oh, by the way, here's how we evolved the manifesto. And the manifesto guys have not gotten together to redo it. They're all basking in their glory and having a good consultant's life. By the way, I was invited to go to that meeting. but couldn't go. And in a way, I'm just as glad I didn't. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that need to change. And I guess that's why we're talking here today, and why you're going to be following up with some other folks, asking, okay, well, maybe it is time to revisit these things. But I think the need to be able to change it, should be part of the thing itself.
It says, just testing you that, if I may, but I think you've made another really, really interesting point. I love that idea of metacognition applied to the whole process. I love that idea. But it does say, I'm reading it here, on the actual manifesto page, not the 12 principles, responding to change over following a plan. So could the authors of the manifesto say to you, for example, oh, no, that's what we meant by responding to change over following a plan. What we meant is you meant to be able to abstract and change the whole thing if that's in the interest of the users in the business.
Oh, so the Humpty Dumpty responding to change. No, look, I mean, we can talk here a lot of times about, what was in the minds of the framers of the Agile Manifesto and what they might have meant. No, I don't think there's anyone who is going to seriously entertain that the commoner's reading of that is going to lead in that direction. There's much clearer language you could have used if that was their intent.
Okay.
These guys understand reflection, and they could have done that. No, there's kind of this, we've come, we saw, we conquered. Let us write down what we believe works.
So going back to that metacognition point, I'm sure everyone knows, but for those who aren't necessarily particularly familiar with that term, metacognition is the highest form of human intellect, really, where you're analyzing, it's thinking about thinking, right? So do you think that as you put it, framers, of which you potentially could have been one, saw ahead over the next 20 years and realized that the whole software industry might change, and they needed to put something into the manifesto so that the manifesto itself and the users of it could adapt it and grow it and develop it? Or do you think that was a complete miss and a complete fail?
I think it was a complete miss. There's no evidence of it there. And I mean, the Agile people do this again and again. I mean, I argued with Ken Schwaber and Jeff Sutherland for years and years. Scrum has the same problem. And eventually, Jeff and Ken picked two of their people and said, all right, you two, and that was one of them, are in charge of gathering the input from the market and giving us input for evolving the Scrum Guide. And it never worked. And one thing I pointed out, the Scrum Guide doesn't have that. The Agile Manifesto doesn't have that. What has that? What has a capability for evolving itself? The capability maturity model, CMMI. They understand meta-agile. Scrum doesn't.
What is that? Talk to me about it. What is it?
The CMM? So the CMM comes out of Carnegie Mellon University or the Software Engineering Institute. And I think it's kind of the brainchild of Watts Humphrey. And it's what a lot of industries use to assess their maturity. So there's 5 levels of SEI maturity, going from level 1, which is basically getting started, to level 5, which is optimizing. And they have a whole set of processes and documents and standards that define what that is. I mean, it's very traditional, very waterfall, very step-by-step. I don't think it works in complex domains. It's good at what it does. I just can't think of many places where we need what it does. But yeah, I mean, they have a facility for changing it. If you don't like something that's in their standard, there is a well-defined process by which you can evolve that framework. And this is what people accuse of being waterfall. So the waterfall people have this meta-learning level, and the Agile people don't. Isn't that curious?
But isn't it true that some waterfall people were actually at Snowbird? I don't know which of these guys on here was a waterfall guy, but I think that was kind of why there was this sliding scale. So, for example, working software over comprehensive documentation. I can see the waterfall guys being in there saying, well, you need to have some documentation, you can't just go straight to the code, right? You have got to have some intermediate form of documentation from the idea to the code. Is that kind of the source of some of that thinking, the waterfall people?
Maybe I wasn't there. I mean, there was a whole set of papers that are kind of interesting that were written 10 years ago on the kind of the 10th anniversary of the Agile Manifesto. And Steve Meller was one of the people who wrote the papers. And I mean, he says in his paper, he says, I'm a self-confessed waterfall guy. And it's a little strange that I was there, but here's my perspective on this as a waterfall guy. I don't recall any of that coming across in his paper. The paper didn't say too much that was surprising. I do think that Steve came with a sense that, even waterfall people knew stuff. I think what was kind of missing from the Agile Manifesto world, and is in fact, I think also missing from the Scrum world, is the project management, product management perspective. I mean, these people have been building knowledge about how organizations work and how requirements flow for decades, not quite centuries, but almost. And okay, maybe there's something about what they're doing that's wrong that we can fix with Agile, but my gosh, when I tried to engage the project management community in the early days of Scrum, I was hissed at and booed and told, oh no, why are you having anything to do with these evil people who have destroyed my world? And I'm like, wait. I mean, they're people. People try to do good things. And I mean, why do we believe that we're perfect? Let's have some dialogue here where we can learn from them. Yeah, maybe we can teach them some stuff. I mean, that'd be great. But we need to learn to listen too.
Interestingly, if you read the 12 principles, it does mention the word project about 3 times. Build projects around motivated individuals. It's talking about. I didn't
notice that.
What?
I didn't notice that.
Yeah. So it does mention projects, and here's another question for you. I'd really value your opinion. If you look at a typical, quote, agile team, whatever that means, a team that a team that self-identifies as we're an agile team. Do you think that the word project and concepts like planning and documentation, which are formally ideas that you would find in the project management world, do you think they are perceived as kind of dirty words, as things that we shouldn't be doing?
Oh, absolutely. The Scrum world is a little different. And by the way, just to get our stereotypes on tight here. Again, I mentioned, Scrum has been around for a long time, and then Agile kind of came later. And I don't see the Scrum people using the word project a lot. Once in a while, I think Ken will say a sprint is like a project. Okay, and so there he uses the P word. But I think most people on any of these things that are under the Agile umbrella avoid using any of this vocabulary, just out of fear of association. They're trying to sell themselves as bringing something new. They don't want to sound like they're bringing the same things that people feel have caused problems in the past, or which the Agile community has done a very good job of associating evil with. So people try to dissociate themselves from those words. So yeah, I mean, and by the way, I wouldn't characterize this quite the way you did, because you said, if we pick an Agile team, one that self-identifies as Agile, do you know a single team that does not self-identify as Agile?
Yeah, you're right.
But okay, maybe a team who feels they really rock at Agile, they're going to run from things like, they're going to run from words like project, like deadline, like all of these words. Commitment. Oh my gosh, the arguments around the word commitment in the Scrum world are amazing.
So here's another question. The Agile Manifesto is very clean, it's very simple, it's pretty easy to understand. You can argue it's quite easy to misunderstand as well. But if you look at the reality of software development, the reality it's very different depending on the situation. In my experience, you can't really compare the sort of processes, methods, tooling, mindsets that would make a 10-person startup, 25-person startup, 50-person startup successful with those that you would find in a software environment in a bank. You think the manifesto applies equally to both, or should we have had two or three? What is your opinion?
No, I really do. And I mean, part of this, it may be that the manifesto people have succeeded at getting this at a high enough level that it's broad, and in fact cover these. Now, to understand that, I need to deconstruct your statement a little bit. You're saying we have these two paradigms and maybe more. I will argue that no software system has ever been built that could not have been built with higher quality and lower cost with 12 people.
Okay.
So there's this management mentality that's I just heard a wonderful metaphor for it called the rice field mentality. That if you want to harvest twice as much rice, you plant twice as much rice, you harvest twice as much rice, you need twice as many people. We're not growing rice here. And so management's focus is on productivity. And yet we know that about half the software out there is never or rarely used. This is broadly known in manufacturing. It turns out Toyota knows this even for cars. When they get to a certain point, about 300 or 400,000 cars, when they've depreciated the assembly line, they fail, they stop putting investment into that line and they move on to a new product rather than evolving the current product because there's really no benefit. And it's the same we do in software. We try to pump more features into the product rather than differentiating ourselves and moving to a new product in the marketplace. So I think that a lot of the focus of management is based on productivity, and productivity comes down to numbers of people, not to mention that my stature as a manager is proportional to the number of people who report to me. And you're a consultant, I'm a consultant, you know this is true. There are great consultants who know that this is true. This is why we have things like SAFe. This is why we have things that's like Scrum at Scale, is because it caters to the management belief that scale is power. It has nothing to do with effectiveness. I mean, there's nothing in Scrum at Scale really about how the structure of the organization relates to the product. Nothing. It's just a way to give managers some peace that they're going to have a place in the management hierarchy when the transition takes place.
Okay, so just drilling into a bit of what you said there in a bit of detail, if I may, I think there are two quite different issues. Again, you've made a very good point about the 12-person complexity. You know, there's like an irreducible complexity of 12 people for any significantly complex software project. If you have more than that, the extra is people that are doing non-core product work. They're fiddling with processes. They're doing processes on processes on processes. They're doing reporting on the effectiveness of processes. They're doing everything around the product apart from the core. I think that's what you're saying.
Bullshit jobs.
But the second point, which is a different point, I think I'm picking up here, is there is nevertheless some level of difference in complexity. So, for instance, if you're a Google and you've just triggered a major R&D project to roll out a new, I don't know, some image tagging functionality that will be deployed worldwide, and you don't have the algorithms properly working for that yet. The team size needed to do that. Just the infrastructure element, let alone the algorithmic development, let alone the testing, let alone the marketing, that's not 12 people.
No, I'm talking, number one, about just development team. So yeah, you have marketing and sales and infrastructure. You're right, of course, that's separate. But I'm talking about, let's call it R&D. You also, with Google, it's a little bit difficult because I'm talking about, I said a product, and Google is more than one product. Google, I think, has killed 50 products in the past 5 years. This is another thing is organizations. Now that's agile. Wow.
Right.
They found that they have good money chasing bad. They're gonna stop spending that money. They're gonna put their money where there's more of an opportunity to add value. So they kill the product. Wow, and that takes courage. Ooh, that's an agile value or a Scrum value or something like that. That's agile.
Yeah.
But I think the products are relatively small. And I've not been inside of Google. Don't know. And I've not been inside of Apple. I have a little insight on how Google works. It's very, very Scrum-like. They have their, or I don't know if they still do, they had their own internal Scrum trainer. I have no insight how Apple works.
Yeah, I suppose those, to be fair, are kind of edge cases, the Amazons and Apples and Googles, and probably not a representative model for, you know, the typical software development project that you will find yourself in if you're coming out of university. But this thing about the one thing that you identified about Agile, you said you thought worked, was this concept of self-organization, this idea of individuals, I'm reading it now, individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Question I'd like to sort of ask is, how do you think that is implemented? I mean, it's one thing kind of writing it on a web page and you and I talking about it conceptually, but in reality, how do you actually create an effective self-organizing team?
There's no recipe, and there's going to be a lot of paths, and you're learning as you go. But there are some things that, so I can't tell you how to do it, but I can tell you how not to do it. So, I mean, how not to do it is to have a multi-site team. So they have to be co-located. You need full bandwidth communication, including fine motor movement. You need that level of communication. So it has to be co-located. You need a high level of trust. Denmark is a land of trust. I think we have the first or second highest trust index of any nation in the world. I actually think Switzerland is now higher than we are. But there has to be a degree of trust between the people. Scrum, I think, tries to call this respect. And that in turn gives you a whole bunch of the other so-called values like openness and the ability to inspect and adapt and so forth. And I mean, if you're a manager or a Scrum Master or a coach or whatever, I mean, there's a lot of tools in your toolkit for engendering that trust on the team and growing that trust. And that may be the hardest part because, I mean, trust is hard to build. It's very fragile, and you can break it in a second. You can take years to build it, and you can break it in a second.
So this is going to one of the cores, actually, I think. The question of self-directing teams, of self-managing teams, of autonomous teams, and the trust and respect issue amongst the team members. Question for you: what role do you think experience and engineering competence have in that? What is your
engineering competence? I think people believe it has some, because I can respect you if you know what you're doing. If you don't know what you're doing, I can either just not respect you, or I can not respect you if you fake it, which is legitimate, or I can help you. Now, the Borland team, this hyper-productive team I studied many, many years ago, every one of the people, the core developers, there were 4 core developers, one for the inference engine, one for the GUI, one for the database, and I can't remember who the other one was. I mean, these were world-class experts. And I mean, if you were the database person, you really thought twice before you questioned the engineering judgment of the rule engine guy on rule engine questions, right? And that became very efficient. It's extremely efficient because, I mean, you just got a lot of arguments out of the way.
Could you just, for listeners, give a very quick overview of that project context so people know a little bit about that?
So when Borland first launched, they had Quattro Pro for DOS. And then Microsoft started growing, and they come out with Excel, and Excel was kind of eating Quattro Pro's lunch. So Borland needed to have a competing product for Windows to be able to compete with Microsoft. And I mean, this was a bet the company project. It had to be done on a very short schedule. I think from start to first delivery was 31 months. Unbelievable volume of value that they delivered. I mean, it's unparalleled by any other product that's ever been studied, to my knowledge. And they invited me to come study that, and yeah, I went and studied it, wrote it up, and this is, for example, where the Daily Scrum comes from, as well as a few other ideas. So when Jeff Sutherland and Ken Schraber presented Scrum at UPSLA in 1995, they cited the fact that, I had already done these studies and showed, this stuff really works. I mean, we have found places in the world where this stuff really works. And then they borrowed the idea of the Daily Scrum and added to it.
But when you had very good people?
Well, this is a long topic. And this is something I've been reading about a lot recently. I just got done reading a book called, I think, Humanity, by a Dutch guy. I'm sorry, I can't remember his name. It's basically about, are people basically evil or basically good? I've done a lot of work with Jerry Weinberg. Jerry was a very dear and close friend of mine. And one of the principles I learned from him is that there really are no bad people. Now, there are people who prefer to work in certain ways based on the wiring. But if you recognize that, what's more important is that people be able to work together as one mind, as a team, rather than putting together a team of prima donnas. Now, there are some exceptions, and the Borland team was a team of prima donnas. Let's be very, very clear. And I think that created a kind of default governance that just made fighting off limits. You just respected a decision and you move forward. And that worked. I don't think that's common. I think the common Scrum teams that really work are not made of superheroes or people who are super, super, super deep. They are made of people who know how to ask questions and know how to find answers. I mean, there's a joke that 90% of the software today comes from stackoverflow.com, right? And so you need to know how to get to stackoverflow.com and find that stuff. It's nothing, you have to invent it yourself. The power and the innovation come in the product definition, not in the engineering.
This is a concept for you, which you may or may not agree with, but in sort of my experience, as the technology industry has become more and more complicated, we've had more and more layers of complexity, layers of abstraction added in terms of software layers, operating systems, tools, frameworks, and things. Now it's got to the point where no one can keep it all in their head. So we've got a whole generation of people that are working at this abstracted layer and are very good at tools and knowing the way around frameworks, and as you say, how to get things done by putting queries into Google, but they have lost connection because they don't need a connection with the underlying tech. And my experience is if you have a team that doesn't have people in the team that have that depth and have that connection, if you're trying to push it and do something that's difficult, you could end up with a big problem.
You certainly could, but I mean, right now, so I'm also a developer, right? I develop and put on the Apple Store a social network analysis tool suite. And right now, I'm taking something which is a three-dimensional graphical animation of an organization, which I had done in OpenGL. And OpenGL is a very mature standard, cross-platform standard, and pretty easy to use. I mean, it's kind of three-dimensional work for dummies, though the engineering inside of it is absolutely brilliant. I mean, it performs like crazy. So Apple wants to sell apples. They don't want to sell OpenGL stuff. So they're now moving to a proprietary standard called Metal. And it's blindingly fast. It's like, I don't know, 1,000 or 1,000,000 times faster than whatever, than OpenGL. But it's called metal for a reason. You're programming against the metal. I mean, there's no abstraction. And so, I mean, you're playing with pixels and rendering triangles every step of the way. Now, I have no background in animated graphics. I have no background in that kind of parallel processing, but I need it for my product. So I'm learning.
Good. Yeah.
And I'm a 67-year-old retired old fart here, right?
Okay.
So if I can do it, certainly, you know, some 23-year-old whippersnapper can do it. And if they can't, and this is the real thing that mystifies me, is that for some reason in software, capitalism doesn't work. It's just not fair. So these companies get by with so much inefficiency, so much waste, so much stupidity. And I think in a fair world, they would have been out of business 20 years ago. But the people keep suffering and slogging through and having terrible work lives until they retire and they keep the company open. So, yeah, I mean, there's not enough in the economic model to push these companies out of business. There's just something about software economies that's weird. But I'm concerned about being able to be happy and challenged and having a sense of contribution when I go to work as well. And I mean, when you ask me this question that we started off with, is software development better now than it was, you know, back in the waterfall days? I think that they're more of a sweatshop.
Yeah. Well, how is it true? How is it right? How is it right that if you pick, I don't care whatever team, you know, US, Canada, UK, Germany, you pick a random software team and put a random person in that team, you know, more than half of their diary will be back-to-back. There'll be, you know, back-to-back meetings.
Yep. And it's, of course, it's stupid, and we know it's stupid. But
you're the process guy. So yep. Is it right that what's going on inside those meetings is really thinking through how a feature is going to work, understanding how it's going to be tested, or is it actually just BS stuff that really was caused by someone injecting noise into the process? And
no, of course it's BS stuff. So I told you about before you started the video, I told you about the early work I did in Bell Labs research to study development to help them become ISO compliant, and that there was no real correlation between actual practice as reported by the real developers and what the process standards said. Let's take an example. So you have a waterfall-like process with quality gates, right? So you have a requirements review, design review, code walkthrough, code inspection, testing, and so forth. So we're at design review, right? How much of your coding is done? Well, you can't. You're not allowed to start coding until your design has been approved in the design review, because the design review is important to actually study design and to actually discuss it and to actually get information. Of course, people have their code 90% done by design review. They have to understand the design. But that's the dirty little secret. I found this again and again and again and again when I run around. So what's the purpose of design review? Most of it is managers or other people in accountability covering their ass saying, you can't blame me. We went through the steps of the process and did everything possible to try to keep errors out of this and to try to do our best. So it's all putting on a show. Right. So of course this stuff is all for show. And this is what I mean, that I don't know if the Agile Manifesto so much changed what people were doing. I mean, in AT&T, when I was studying these development teams on the 5ESS development switch, this is back in the 1980s. What they were doing today, we will call Agile. They would respond to change. They could get a change out to the customer in 24 hours, right? Agile Manifesto says 2 weeks. That's their high bar. All right. I think what the Agile Manifesto did is it made it okay for people not to have an excuse of having all these meetings and these quality gates and these hoops that we need to jump through. It was now okay to do what the developers found they needed to do to get the job done.
Does that go back to the sort of experience point though? Because there's a thing I've encountered in software, a concept called code shyness. You may have heard of that.
Oh, I can imagine.
So this is the sort of point, new project starting up, just getting the team organized. You need 5 developers. You've only got 1 on board. You're working with recruiters. It's in that sort of stage. The requirements aren't, even the business requirements aren't properly defined. Project may not even be fully approved. You're in that sort of messy stage. That's the stage I love, by the way. Some people have a huge problem writing that first line of code, doing anything. Because we need a requirement specification, or
that's right.
No, we need a PRD, or no, I know we need business case approval, or no, we have to have the. How much of a real problem do you think that is?
Well, this is a real problem, but it's not the individual. It's the education system, it's the corporate culture, it's the reward system. Those are the things that put the fear into people about being held accountable for that first line of code that they write. I mean, basically Alistair Coburn has a pattern called clear the fog. He says, even normal products get into this state where it's all fog. You can't see anything. Do something. I mean, put a recipe card feature into your software. Do something, develop something to get the end user talking to you and to get that dialogue going. Get unstuck, clear the fog. And so it doesn't matter what the first line of code is, because you've given yourself permission to change it. And the industrial culture says that rework is waste. I mean, even Lean says rework is waste. But the brilliant thing that people don't understand about Lean, and Agile is so far from this, rework in requirements adds value. Rework in development adds cost. So you want rework as you're exploring requirements. And here I do agree with and this is another one of these Agile things, the code is the design. Yeah, I don't mean, show them a UML diagram. I mean, show them a running product. Write some code. I mean, even if it's only a recipe program. No, I didn't ask for a recipe program. I asked for a missile guidance system. Well, okay. Well, we'll try a guidance system next time. Do something.
This is going to the essence of Lean, which is sort of de-risking the risky stuff. This is going back to what we were talking about, the requirements discovery. You can't discover the requirements unless you put something in front of people to show them what it looks like. And then they'll tell you, I don't want that. I don't know what I do want, but I can tell you I don't want that.
Right.
For example, that's already valuable.
And notice the requirements didn't change. You're just looking for them.
Right. But where
Agile,
is that? But where is that in Agile? Where specifically is that in Agile?
But Agile misses the boat on that, because Agile only responds to change. That's what it says. It doesn't say we're going to discover requirements or we're going to discover directions. It says we're going to sit back and wait until change comes up and bites us on the bottom. Read the friendly manifesto, RTFM, baby.
Right. Yeah, this is so good. I like this. This is really good. All right. So we've had quite a lengthy conversation already, and I think we've kind of talked about some good things that are Agile and some not so good things. Can we move into the sort of next segment, which is really talking about things in Agile that definitely haven't worked or don't work or can't work or would have worked, but the industry changed, so now they don't work. I mean, we've got one already on the table, which is this whole thing about requirements discovery, and the fact that there's no real specific guidance given to people on how to do that, or even whether that's an important component of successful software development. What else do you think has gone wrong?
I think there's, I mean, I did some thinking about this. I actually have some notes here, and it kind of comes down to 4 areas. So, and I've kind of referred to some of them. One of them is it's about working software. So we find that in the principles. We also find that in the values. That working software is the main harbinger of whether you're heading in the right direction. Well, no, I mean that the green bar comes up has nothing to do with end user value. You're nowhere near that feedback loop. And so XP kind of ends at the green bar coming up. Now XP tries to fix this by having the on-site customer, for example. Well, we know that doesn't work. There's a lot of research kind of from down your way, by the way, by James Noble's group that shows that on-site customer doesn't work.
Right.
Agile has this very inward focus and isn't going out. Scrum has the same problem. I mean, if you look at what most Scrum trainers train or read or what they write, what happens at the sprint review is you review what happened this sprint, and you have the customers there and they sign off in blood saying, yeah, this is what we want. And then you have the handoff. No, at sprint review, you should be saying, hey, we shipped this thing to you 3 sprints ago. How's it going? Is it working in your process? And now we've brought the end user experience into the feedback loop. And Agile, and you find this if you look carefully at the Agile Manifesto. So it's about working software. It is not about a working product, and it is not about a working process. So software is always a service. It's always a process. We just deliver it as a product. But as a product, it has absolutely no value unless it's running and supporting some service and some process, right?
Right.
And that process is in the end user space. That's what we need to test. And you don't do that in a testing lab. You certainly don't do that with TDD. And you are not going to be able to do it before the sprint review. This is going to take the end user some time to sit with it. So I think that the whole, and this leads to terrible waste, because what we do is we kind of guess and check it off and then ship it. And we wait for the customer to come back and complain. We say, oh, well, we'll charge you this much for this new sprint or this new feature or this new episode, right? Revenue generating opportunity. Instead of having the interaction, we wait for them to come with feedback and we charge them for it.
I've been in many situations, where stuff is put into production because we just ran out of time to do the testing. And what happens is the customer does the QA in their UAT or an assembly environment, or even worse, you find out about bugs in a production situation.
Yeah.
That's because people are pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed to get the stuff out. And I think it's also because, going back to what we're talking about, to the back-to-back meetings, there's just not enough time to think the stuff through. There's too much time spent on all the BS, not enough on the core. And so people just run out of time to develop the thinking, to codify the thinking, to test the thinking before they send it out.
Document the thinking.
Right. Yeah, right.
About this working software thing is that user experience has gone to hell. I mean, they talk about customer. Well, customer is the one with the checkbook wearing the suit and tie. And I mean, we've maybe seen these movies of, there's a car manufacturer you want to sell a process to, or you want to sell some machinery to, and they ask the CEO of the auto manufacturer to change a tire on the car, right? And they can't. And this is to develop some sensitivity that your whole tire changing thing really sucks.
Right.
That's what customer means. And the whole Agile Manifesto is based around customer rather than end user. And this is why the user experience people laugh at us in the Agile community. So I think if there's one thing that the folks out there in TV land should remember from this is that we need to be much more attentive about engaging our end users. So the Japanese talk about management being down on the gemba. The gemba, it's the real workplace. There's a guy named Kobata-san, and he created this formalism called the 5 realities, the Gogen, the real process, the real person, the real location, all of these. And the Agile Manifesto, again, read it very carefully after you go away from this presentation. The whole scope of it ends when the software goes to the end user. There's nothing about walking in the end user's shoes. And that we need to fix. And for example, they say the best architectures, requirements, and designs emerge from self-organizing teams. Really? Now, these are object-oriented people. I mean, Kent Beck will always tell you how object-oriented a person he is. But Alan Kay will say that objects come from end-user mental models, and that they are there to take the end-user's model and put it in the machine as an extension of the end user. We've lost that, both in object-oriented programming and in our processes, in the way that we engage the users in driving the architecture and driving the design. The design and architecture of an object-oriented system, that is of an interactive system, should be driven by end-user mental models.
So again, to test you on that, I do agree with the point, by the way, but just to sort of develop it a bit, for people that might be listening to this who are thinking, oh yeah, you know, it doesn't really work for me, because in my situation, in my product situation, in my Scrum team, or my 2 or 3 Scrum teams, we're developing a software component for a customer, meaning another company, and they are the ones that have the relationship with the end users. We can't get anywhere near the end users because we're told we're not allowed to touch them. We're not allowed to get involved in meetings. We're not allowed to outreach to them. We're not allowed to sort of have any contact with them at all. And all we do is have a couple of personas, if we're lucky, that outline what those users are doing. So how do you actually solve a problem like that?
So I'm a Scrum trainer, and that is just simply disallowed in Scrum. And I will mention that any number of times during Scrum training. Every Scrum team delivers directly to end users, full stop. Otherwise, what you have is an assembly line. And then you need Kanban to synchronize the handoffs between elements of the assembly line. That's waterfall.
Right.
That's having all these silos that have to be synchronized. So Kanban is a waterfall synchronization technique. And it's used for organizations like the one you mentioned, where the teams are not interacting with an end user. So where do they get the requirements? Do you think the requirements really are distilled down from an end user point of view? No, they make them up.
That's right. No, that's exactly what happens. You'll probably have a junior product manager who's actually just writing the stuff down because he or she thinks it's a good idea. I mean, if you're lucky, They would have looked at a competing product and tried to come up with something that's a bit different or a bit interesting, but they have got no clue. And the more effort they put into those requirements, in my experience, the more likely they are to change as soon as they hit production.
Yep, that's right, because they're so brittle and so detailed. Totally agree. I've seen this too.
Right. But how do you fix it?
Oh, so we talk about cross-functional teams in Scrum. And this is why I reacted as I did when you asked this question about expertise and having the best people. That's maybe okay if you can predict every competency you will need. But we're in a world where even the competency needs are changing. So you can't set yourself up for success. You have to have a team that can learn. And you mentioned lean, so I guess you have some familiarity with that too. But if you look at the work that Takeuchi and Nanaka were doing, Nanaka, his whole thing is basically knowledge management. So it's organizational learning and how you're able to get ahead of forthcoming trends and incorporate them into the learning of the development team, so you can be at the front of the pack. That in turn is this meta learning thing. I mean, all these things tie together. So if you have the meta learning and you do your best to get a cross-functional team that can cover 80 or 90% of the cases and deliver something directly to an end user, that fixes it. I mean, I had one client where they decided to use Scrum, and they lined up the Scrum teams around technologies. And so if there was a new feature, the new feature might have to touch, 5 or 6 technologies, the voice codec, the human interface, the database, and so forth. And each team in working on this had to build on the work of the preceding team. So in one sprint, you would do the database work. And once they were done, now the codec people could do their work in the next sprint. So the effective sprint length was 6 months.
Right. So non-sprint.
Right. So they reinvented waterfall. They added all these stages and more or less use Kanban to manage it. Right. So, yeah, I mean, we know how to fix this. And I mean, when I go into Scrum teams, if they haven't done this, it's very hard to change. And so when we're starting out in development, this is the first thing you do. Because if you've already made an investment in putting in process infrastructure and organizations and so forth, and now you want to change from component teams to functional teams, you have to turn the whole company upside down. And it's extremely painful. And there was a very, very large corporation that I got a contract to go in and help them do an agile transformation. And the owner had just decreed that they were going to have functional teams, and they've been doing this for 6 months. And I said, "You're dead."
Yeah. Do you think that's actually? I mean, again, I suppose there are different situations, but I mean, in my sort of area, in the product domain, I see quite often product-centric product teams, like product managers or product owners. They'll have some sort of system architecture diagram. There'll be some block on the diagram, I don't know, prepay module or something, or there'll be something else, something about, I don't know, self-provisioning module, and you'll have a product manager associated with that. The problem with that often is that functional component has no direct meaning or value to end users.
That's right.
So
why is it there?
It's a non-product. It's a non-product.
Right.
Being managed by a product manager.
Bullshit
right?
Jobs.
But even then, if you look often at companies that are even at a relatively early stage, I find, and you look at the features they're putting on the website, you go to the web page, you look at the product, and there'll be the free option, then there's a sort of $9.99 a month, and then there's a sort of $29.99 a month. And you look at the features, quite often you'll see features in there that have no value to the customer at all.
Yep. The question is, how many of these are agile?
But how is it happening? Why have we got this? But these are agile teams. Why is it happening?
Oh, yes. This probably would not happen on a waterfall team, because on the waterfall team, you have a contract and someone paying for it. And if they're paying for it, what they're getting, they'd better find useful. Now, the problem with waterfall is that it's a one cycle thing. And so what the customer will do is they'll pad the RFP or the RFQ up front to make sure that anything they could ever possibly want is in that RFP. And so you end up with all this crap that you never use. So you still are going to be developing a lot of crap. But other than that, I mean, there's accountability in waterfall that starts with this contract where people are saying, I'm willing to pay for this. Now, Agile blow this away by doing things in small increments, because first of all, customers guess wrong what they want. Okay, we're going to use the feedback to help them explore. And I think that's the biggest advantage of Agile is having this feedback and doing things in the small chunks, in the small iterations. because you can't guess everything you're going to know.
So those are two going back. Those are two things that we can identify in Agile that are really good: the concept of self-managing teams and the concept of small chunks. Things that didn't work, we're talking about. We don't have any sort of theory for discovery requirements, latent requirements, and this whole issue around delivering working software. We don't have a way of understanding whether the software is actually doing adding real value, which ultimately means it's being used by real people to perform a particular task or function or something.
What I wish the manifesto were more explicit about is getting feedback from that thing that you deliver every 2 weeks,
right?
And using it to retire feature or adjust direction. So yes, that does have value.
Yeah. Okay, so other things in the Agile arena, looking at the manifesto and the principles that, are there any things that we know now because of the reality of how software is today compared with what it was in 2001, where developing even a simple e-com site was a huge undertaking, requiring millions of dollars. Now you just go to WordPress and, it's a matter of $9.99 a month. You've got e-com and you've got email marketing, you've got a blog, and you've got all this stuff. It's just become a lot simpler to do the same chunk of functionality.
I disagree.
Okay, interesting. Go ahead.
So I'm going to sound like an old guy here, right? I hate to reminisce, but back in the days, back in 2009, when programmers were programmers, you could write a compiler for a fairly sophisticated language that would run in 20K of memory, and today it's megabytes, right? Someone has to compile that, someone has to test it, someone has to maintain it. You get all of this accidental complexity, and most Agile people talk about fighting complexity. They don't understand the difference between essential complexity and accidental complexity. And I think where you and I are is trying to remind people that there's a good deal of essential complexity that you can attack with thinking. It's going to be much harder to deal with that with feedback and local adaptation, but it's more big picture stuff. And I think Agile, by working in the small, gets rid of the opportunities for that. So I think we're able to generate waste about an order of magnitude faster than we ever have been able to in history. Why? Everyone has their own machine. The machines are 1,000 or 10,000 times as fast as they were those 20 years ago. And these are the things that have powered the Agile revolution, but it's not all good.
The Agile Manifesto talks a lot about self-directing teams and, we welcome change, all of this. And we're saying that's all good, fine. But today we've got things like Slack. We've got Jira. We've got comment threads in Git and all sorts of different ways. Email, of course, where incorrect information can be instantly distributed to hundreds of people. So what we've actually got is a way to distribute disinformation and noise, to inject noise into the system. So my question, really, open question, do you think that this is actually creating some fundamental level of instability in the way the thinking's being developed?
It's possible. As someone who's a researcher, wow, I'd love to study that. That's really fascinating, and I'd never quite thought of it in that way before. You could be right. That's the kind of thing that I hesitate to answer without digging into it a little more, getting some data. There's a great PhD thesis in there. That's brilliant, but it's a tantalizing thesis. I like this. This is very subtle because the Agile Manifesto people would say, okay, yeah, these tools are creating the problem because they're replacing individuals and interactions. And they would be the first to say, okay, we're against this. But it's really, really subtle. And one of the things, just rereading the manifesto several times here the past couple of days, I'm really struck by the lack of teamwork. The word team actually appears 3 times, but it's basically as an administrative entity. And if you replace it with the word group, it works equally well. Why do people do TDD? Because they can. They don't have to get together with the test group or some other group. I mean, they have their own machine. And now they have these tools and they can. And so I'm in control. Me. I don't have to think or talk to a customer. I'm an introvert. I don't have to talk to my team members. I can sit here and we do TDD. Or maybe I have to pair program, but that's only, someone who I really, really like.
So what else have we got on your list of agile woes then, things that you think haven't really worked out?
Well, I think it's subtle because a lot of them are misinterpretations of the manifesto rather than and again we can say what was in the mind of the framers and what did they intend. But it says, for example, build teams around motivated individuals. Well, the research shows that motivation is already intrinsic. You don't build team motivated individuals, it's the other way around. The thing about documentation, I had a friend named Paul Chisholm, and he had this really mind-bending view of things. He says, it's extremely important in an Agile project that you build a requirements and design document and that everyone be involved in it. They have regular reviews and get together and dot every I and cross every T and then burn it.
Right. Interesting.
The value is in writing the document and having the discussion. So he calls this disposable analysis. And the document becomes the artifact you build that encourages the right kind of social interaction.
Writing forces you to think.
Of course, we know this.
And often software ultimately is just a particular intellectual construct that's documented in the form of computer code. A language that happens to be a logical language. And you must have intermediate documentary artifacts, Word documents, Google documents, spreadsheets, process diagrams that take you from the construct to the code. You can't just go straight there in one go, not for anything that's significantly complex. And in my experience, it doesn't need to get very complex before you can't hold it all in your head.
Yep. There's another thing like that, which is estimation. I love estimation, not because I like predictability, but because estimation becomes a ceremony that forces me to think about what I'm going to do in enough detail that I've started tripping over some of the emergent requirements before I've actually written code.
Right.
And now we can have discussions about them. So there are some of these things that have come kind of by accident. Now, estimation did not come out of Agile, right? This comes out of Scrum and more out of the business side of Scrum, but you're not going to find it in the Agile Manifesto. So this following a plan thing, following the plan is the sin. That's the sin. Making a plan and following it rather than adapting it. But comprehensive documentation can be a way of having that dialogue. So there's something very deep going on here. I know another system like this. It was a payroll system. So they had a perfect requirements oracle. If you wanted to know the requirements, you went to the system and you ran it. And they were told they were going to build a replacement for it because they were trying to get software maintainability. So they're rewriting it in Smalltalk. No change in requirements to a first approximation. Same system. Never delivered.
Right.
It failed. What was the product? Chrysler's payroll system, C3. This is the product from which XP was derived. Now, there's something really, really interesting going on there. This is based on the research I did in AT&T and looking that if you go under the covers of the ISO compliant processes, everyone is inspecting and adapting and doing what they need to do to get the job done. I wonder if there's any difference between any two processes over development processes over the past 40 years or between any two development processes today. What's different is in the training they've had and the articulation they have. But I think for people who understand deeply what it takes to get a complex product out the door, people do what they need to do. Now, the reason I like Scrum is that Scrum is kind of the set of training wheels that get you to the point of realizing that, so you can take the decision onto your own. Scrum is not a method. It doesn't tell you what to do. It's a set of training wheels. And I think what XP tried to be is the thing at the end of that process of going through the training wheels. And I think the Agile Manifesto is an attempt to philosophically formalize what the end state of the organization and mindset will be if you have been through that learning process. The problem is it's one level too shallow. There's a learning model I like to show in my courses.
The Agile Manifesto doesn't have associated application notes, doesn't have a user guide.
Yeah.
So it is open to interpretation and misapplication, you could argue. But what do you think about that?
Oh, yeah. And I mean, there's a lot of things that you can easily interpret from the manifesto. I mean, let me tell you what the manifesto does is blames the user. After all, the software worked, all the tests passed, the green bar came up, then the user screwed it up. All the problems came after we delivered. There's nothing in there about the end user. They're the ones who changed the requirements. Oh, we understood perfectly what they said. It's not our fault. So they changed the requirements, and we respond to changing requirements because we understand the requirements. There's nothing in there about dialectic and coming to understanding. And I mean, this is what the UX people, this is what drives the UX people nuts. So it becomes an us versus them. What we really need in developers, there's a brilliant paper that was written by Jesse Watson out of Amazon. And his focus of the paper is, why are remote working consultants not getting, not commanding high salaries? And why is the demand for them going down and down? He says, the companies are realizing that these consultants need to be part of the team. And it's not just for the fluffy reasons, but what we need implementation technical expertise and business expertise together in one skull. And this whole notion that, well, if you're doing banking software, you should probably understand something about banking. So I once went to a tutorial on extreme programming where they were telling me, how do you build banking software? Well, do the simplest thing that could possibly work. So all a bank is a calculator. You can add to the balance and you can subtract to the balance. So your first user story is 2 user stories for a calculator for doing a sum and doing a subtraction. Now, this is an example given by a household name, one of the leaders of the Agile movement, dead serious. Based on the whole mental model, the balance is something sitting in a register and not calculator. No, a bank balance is a process, which is an iteration over transactions in a transaction log. It's not a balance sitting in a calculator somewhere. I mean, it totally missed the whole point. So it was technologically sound, and yes, the software worked, but it did not support the business. It did not support change. Oh, that's okay, because when they're unable to change it, they'll come back and ask for more. Wow, we can have another sprint. This is guaranteed to keep us in business for life. So if Agile is all about dealing with these emergent requirements and homing in on what the customer needs via feedback, what do you need on the development side? You need a really smart database individual who can respond to the fact that we need to do something in the database to fix what this user is using. Do we need a smart GUI person? No, from the technical point of view, you need a team that can reason as one mind. And when I talk about teamwork, that's what I mean. But there are no teams. Well, there are teams, but there's no teamwork in the Agile Manifesto. It's individuals and interactions over processes and tools.
Team that can reason with one mind. I love that.
Right. And that whole concept is at the core of organizational learning and the kind of responding to change. And you can use the sports analogy of like a rugby team or a football team. So the striker is totally guarded and you're near the goal. What do? Well, the team has a strategy to get it to some other player who can get it into the goal. That's inspecting and adapting. But the whole team needs to be aware of that. It's not about individual talents and the protocols between them. It's the team is one mind. And that whole aspect is completely absent from the manifesto. And this is why I like more what's called lean, kind of the Toyota production system formulation, or what Nanaka Sensei is working on. It's more about this organizational learning and this notion, which in Scrum we call swarming. He studied all kinds of corporations in Japan, Toyota, NEC, Nippon Electric, all these, and he found that in the most innovative, productive products, everyone was doing everything all the time. So, I mean, if you try to make a PERT chart or a Gantt chart out of this, it'd be impossible because the tasks would be overlapping. You can't do it. There's no partial ordering. And he said, well, what's the human equivalent of overlapping tasks? What does it mean to have overlapping people? So it'd be people with their arms around each other's shoulders, overlapping each other. What do we call that? A scrum. And that's where the word scrum comes from.
Right. So here's a leading question. Might be hard to answer, but it would be good if you could provide some high-level arm-waving type answer. We're talking about this concept of a team that can reason with one mind, as one mind, and we're kind of equating that the sort of organizational process response to that as a Scrum team. Let's assume. Question: how many Scrum teams, what percentage of Scrum teams achieve that level?
So no, it's not, it's about doing good enough.
Right.
And I mean, I think one of the sins of the old style of development was this pretense of perfection and trying to reach perfection. This was really, really big in AT&T. I mean, AT&T invented the phrase, do it right the first time. You never do it right the first time. Forget it. Then there is no learning.
That's right. Yeah.
So
right.
This is all about learning. And I think the framers of the manifesto superficially understand that because there's one sentence in there that says, okay, every once in a while, you should contemplate your navel and make improvements. So they save themselves, at least they have that there. But it's not the spirit. And one of the reasons I like, well, not lean, not the American lean, because that's a big set of misunderstandings, but more, the stuff that the old Japanese companies are really doing, the Hondas, the Toyotas, and so forth. It's all about learning and not about writing down the manifesto, but changing that thing all the time. I mean, Toyota has gotten 60, 70,000 suggestions in the suggestion boxes from the employees for changing their process.
Right. Yeah.
Where do I go to put something in the suggestion box for the Agile Manifesto or the Scrum Guide? No, we've been here.
Yeah, we have.
Well, looking ahead to a way forward in the third slide, one thing we could propose is we need another Agile Manifesto, or we need another document. I think that most people don't even know the 12 principles of the manifesto. They've probably never read them, but they'll swear up and down they're Agile. So it's not what's in the manifesto that's important. It's just that it is a manifesto and that it sent the social message. So I think the same thing will happen if you have the user guide. Now, first of all, I don't think you can make it general enough. But even if you could, it's just a document, and it's kind of like saying, I mean, you're kind of looking for, I think, the religious equivalent of a Bible or a Torah or a Talmud or and then there's a commentary on it. I mean, in Judaism, there's Torah, and then there's the Talmud, which is the commentary on the Torah, and there's the Mishnah, which are the commentary on the commentary on the
Right.
Torah, right? So it's commentary all the way down. The problem is that begs an authority-based culture where, okay, someone has knowledge and I don't have access to it. To me, the essence of Agile is that we're basically all born with the wherewithal to do this right. And it's been culture that stripped away our intuition to do this right. And what the name of the game should be is stripping away our ignorance and stripping away the blindness that has come from our project management education, from our certification, from our enculturation in the education system, and from the trappings of our own cultures, to be able to be free to do things that are reasonable and based on real open human behavior, rather than something that's codified. I do a lot of work in Japan, and there's a lot of these things I think the Japanese have right. One ancient Chinese document that's part of the Japanese legacy is called in Japanese, the Dokyo, or the Tao Te Ching. And the first thing in the Tao Te Ching is that the Tao that can be named is not the true Tao. That is, if it's in writing, you've missed the point. This is a well-known staple of philosophy. Voltaire said, La parole a été donnée à l'homme pour casser sa pensée, that speech was given to mankind and that he might better hide his thoughts. Words obfuscate in writing. Dialectic clarifies. So this isn't about having a document. This is about creating a culture of dialectic. Now, my small contribution to that has been the pattern culture, where we get together and hammer out these ideas and refine them, formally once a year and informally as often as we can. So we publish this book for Scrum called a Scrum Book, but I mean, it's the goal is to refine that. I mean, COVID has really gotten in the way. But yeah, I mean, what's best practice today is not going to be best practice tomorrow. We learn.
So,
and we're going to celebrate that learning.
We started sort of postulating really about the experience level of the typical Agile team. If you look at the demand for software developers, which is outstripping supply, and the number that are being produced, the average experience level per team is relatively low, handful of years typically. Experience
in what?
What in life, in business, in technology,
okay,
in everything.
Thank you.
Right.
I really would have been down your throat if you said experience in Agile, but okay, good.
No. Oh, just kind of like a bit green, right? On all fronts.
Yep.
I mean, some of these people got very high potential. They're very bright. They've got great futures ahead of them. I'm not saying they're not, but they're just a bit green.
Yeah.
So, what specifically can be done about that? I mean, the reality is we're not going to have super experienced teams everywhere. That's just the reality. And we're saying we can't really provide documentation and videos. We can do courses and things, but there's a limit to what you can do with that. What specifically do you think we can do? Is it going to computer science courses? Do we need to put modules in computer science courses? What do we need to do?
No, I think this goes really, 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 really deep. And I kind of was touching the edge of it earlier when I said that the whole economic system of software is screwed up. That, the amount of money we're making for software does not reflect the amount of work that's put into it. The economy is unreasonable. I don't think we know how to measure competence, especially competence in a given application area. So again, it's kind of like we keep measuring the competence of penmanship and, having the equivalence of a spelling bee and using that to tell whether people are qualified to work on a software product, rather than are they going to fit into the team? Do they understand the business? Do they have the maturity to know when to defer or socialize a decision rather than taking a decision unto themselves? So I think that's part of it. And the other part of it is legacy, is that we have these old legacy organizations that are top-down power controlled, and you have people that are too far out of contact with day-to-day life, making decisions and sending them down. Most of the organizations I work with are like that. And by the way, that colors your perspective and my perspective of the world. You can divide up software development in a number of ways. One is, where does the money go? And it used to be that 2% of the US gross national product went to defense software, just defense software, 2% of the economy. Now, is that where most of the software came out? Well, no, because they're not that efficient, but it is where, so where do you put your effort? You're going to put your effort where all this money is being spent, or you're going to put your effort where most of the software is being done? And these are very different. This is where I put on my academic hat, and I will go out into the field and do things where there is no economic benefit. So when I did these studies of these organizations, Bell Labs paid for the whole thing. I was working for Bell Labs, and I'd go in and offer these organizations a free organizational consulting, and I'd get an organizational model out of it. And that enabled me to see a much broader spectrum. So all these questions about the typical software team, the typical developer on a team, I'm very, very careful when using those terms, because as a consultant, my view is extremely skewed. As an academic at labs, I was able to tap into a much, much broader spectrum of that. And there are not many people who have that luxury. We do have some numbers, though. The average software engineer programs for 5 years before being promoted to manager.
Right.
That means, now, if you look at the rate of turnover, what, the average software engineer has less than 2 years of experience? So fair enough. But still, it gets back to this article I mentioned by this guy from Amazon. Is you also need the business knowledge in that same skull. So it can't just be learning the technologies that support machine learning. You have to understand how is it going to be used, and understand, for example, how to manage the risks. So for example, if you're putting AI at the end of a voice response system, so I'm going to call the operator and say, help, my husband has just had a heart attack. I mean, having the right response there and being able to modify my algorithms to do the right thing next time is a life or death situation. That's a lot different than asking, where's the nearest place I can go to get a liter of milk? And if you're going to tell me that I'm using the same technology for both of these, I got a bridge to sell you in Brooklyn.
Right. No, I would agree. I would totally agree. For
the sake of this discussion, I won't disagree about being a master of your tools. I would take it a step further. Again, from Japanese culture, there are some temples or some pagoda that they rebuild like once a century or once every 11 years or whatever. I once toured a temple that was being remodeled by very, very special craftsmen who learn these ancient techniques. The first thing they do is build their own tools.
Wow. Interesting.
Now, I'm very much the same. So instead of using some framework, I will build a framework that I understand and that works at very low-level portable APIs. That gives me portability. And so this product I was telling you about, the social network analysis program, there's code in there that dates back to 1992. Because I'm not dependent on the framework of the week.
Right.
I've made my own tools.
But actually, that's interesting because going back to the Mike West point, and not that I want to sort of over represent his position because he's not on, but I think he's not saying that those additional roles, business roles, a need for judgment isn't necessary. I think he's saying within the realm of the day-to-day engineering, if you're doing that particular thing, machine learning stuff, most of it is bread and butter application, pressing buttons, tool.
Yes.
You can't just build products with those people. The sort of domain that I used to experience when I was an engineer, and I compare that with what I'm seeing now in software, we're talking about in terms of levels of technical competence and professionalism and all of that, just radically different.
I understand.
It's just necessity. It's economics and market trends, market pressures, market forces. It's forced the market into that situation. A lot more than was the case in 2001.
A lot of people will say, you need this high priesthood. Oh, you have to go to the 2-day certification course to understand Scrum. What a crock of crap. You have to take a 6-month certified course in C# from Microsoft to understand C#. Take 3 or 4 days and read some C# code and write some stuff. If you've programmed in C or C++ or Java or anything, you take 3 or 4 days. It's not a 6-month course. We have to be careful not to set up priesthoods, and that's what a lot of these frameworks are about. And either by intent of getting money out of them, or just because they're so freaking complicated. I mean, my gosh, the whole metal framework is enormous.
But actually, this is not going back to your sort of example of the Japanese craftsmen that used to make their own tools. Going back quite some time, when people were at school, they would do metalwork or woodwork, as an example. The point is, learning to use a lathe and a drill press is kind of like learning to use TensorFlow these days. Not quite, but it's a skill. You learn it. You go, once you've shown how to use it, show around, this is what you do to do that. Now you have to make something. Now you have a little project. And now you have to go to TensorFlow and you have to build a little model. You have to upload some data, you've got to press these buttons, you've got to set these hyperparameters. And there is kind of an analogy there, I feel.
Yep.
It's tool fluency.
And here they're reading continuous attention to technical excellence enhances agility. Oh, what I need for agility is technical excellence. It's like salt in a meal. Yeah, it's nice. And it's maybe even necessary. But my gosh, what a pretentious, bogus statement.
Yeah. And I think that is not, my experience is you need a percentage of the team that has that. But even for some problem situations and products, you don't need it at all. In an early stage startup, when you're starting to build a product, there's so many online services and cloud services today. You can get an awful long way. And I'm not sort of marginalizing this or downplaying it. You can get a long way just by knowing your way around tools and knowing how to press the right buttons. When you're talking about high volume traffic, when you're pushing the envelope, when you're doing something new, and when you have to get down to the bare metal, that's when the technical excellence stuff comes in.
Yeah, but it's not just technical excellence, it's also systems thinking. And Agile is, so apart from the Agile Manifesto, there's this whole culture that's kind of come out of it that's just patently silly. And to take technical excellence, as I said, I used to work for AT&T, and on the 4ESS switch, which was a tandem switch, a toll switch for processing long distance calls, there was an inner loop there where every machine cycle that you could remove from that loop would mean an additional $1 million in profit per year to AT&T.
Wow.
Now, that requires good systems thinking. Now, technical excellence will help you find the ways through caching or sorting assembly language statements or fixing the compiler to get there. But even to know that to do that requires, some level of system understanding. And I really see this, it gets back to this one skull thing again, that the Agile Manifesto completely misses, and especially the Agile culture completely misses. One of my favorites is the Agile folks all say, defer decisions to the last responsible moment. You've heard this, right? Now, where did that come from? So if you look at the Toyota production system, there is a concept called the last responsible moment. It's part of their formal model. The last responsible moment is the moment beyond which your ability to make a decision is taken away. So if this meeting ends at 6 o'clock and there's a bus at 6:10 and a 6:20 and at 6:30, you have a decision to make about what bus to take, the 6:10 or the 6:20. And it takes you 10 minutes to walk to the bus station. Your ability to make that decision is taken away at 6 minutes and 1 second. You no longer have a choice because you're not going to make the 6:10 bus. So that's the last responsible moment. Now, you know that if you have a bus schedule. In a complex adaptive system, how do you know when the last responsible moment is? And the problem is you don't. How in the hell can you defer a decision to the last responsible moment when you don't know what it is? And what happens is you don't recognize when it is until you've passed it. So what the last responsible moment is there for in Lean is pull decisions forward. Make decisions as soon as you have just enough to make a decision to take action that will give you feedback.
Right.
It is not about deferring. It's about pulling them forward. The Agile people got this exactly backwards. Now, I can name you 5 things like that.
Go on.
Oh, 5 whys. Another popular Agile darling, right? What's the purpose of 5 whys?
Drill down to find a root cause.
Really?
Well, that's how it's taught. If you go to a typical company, that's how they will explain it to you.
Right. So that's Lean. And Lean is this American thing. It comes from the Japanese because when the oil crisis happened in North America, they brought over a whole bunch of Japanese consultants to try to find out, why are the Japanese successful and why are they able to stay in business and make these fuel efficient cars and so on and so forth. This is when Taiichi Ono was very high in engineering in Toyota. And he has written, by the way, in Japanese, this has been translated to English. More or less, I did my best to prevent the Americans from really understanding what's going on.
Right.
Root cause analysis is a really good example. Why is root cause analysis cool? Because you get to blame someone. You get to find the root cause and find blame. Does a problem in an adaptive complex system have a root cause? No. 5 whys. You ask the questions until you find a loop. And you come back to a question you've asked before. You fix the problem by breaking that loop. That's 5 whys. But the Japanese sold the Americans a bill of goods. Kanban is another one. Removing impediments is another one. You remove impediments to get flow, right?
Yeah, go on.
That's total crap.
Okay.
You have a river that's flowing. They say you get flow by taking the rocks out of the river. I mean, that's what Ono taught the Americans, right? So that's fine as long as your fixed cost is very nearly zero. If your fixed cost starts to dominate, which is what's true in software, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't have much variable cost. It's relatively fixed cost. Then that doesn't work. There are other tricks for increasing flow. And Toyota keeps this a very close secret. But
you're using
removing impediments isn't it.
right. You're referencing the Japanese model quite a lot for good reason. To what extent do you think that the Japanese culture, which is quite different to what you find in the West, in Anglo-Saxon companies, Germany where I'm based, US, UK, Australia, blah, blah. To what extent do you think that is a factor?
Not as much as people feel. I mean, I was once approached by a very large multinational company. They're merging a Japanese company with one from Europe and the United States. And they're concerned about the cultural repercussions at management. And I said, look, the cultural problems are not the problems. The problems are you need the team sitting together in the same place. You need blah, 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 blah. There is a little bit of this. However, if you look at modern Japan industry, who's the architect of a lot of modern Japanese industry? W. Edwards Deming. So Eisenhower sent a construction, cultural reconstruction team after the war that comprised Deming and a lot of other people, because Deming had given up on Detroit. I mean, Deming told me that the people in Detroit weren't listening to him, so he went to the Japanese, and the Japanese were willing to listen to him. And he's had a great outlet there, and won national prizes and so on and so forth. Now he's not Japanese.
Good point.
So I think there's a mix. You have this yin and yang, to coin a phrase, of Western culture and Eastern culture that you find in Japanese industry. There's a lot of these things that are not foreign to the Western mind. And once you explain them, I mean, like I explained 5 whys, it's like, oh, darn, it's obvious. Productivity is another one. I mean, every Western manager is out to increase productivity. I have a little simulation I show people about how productivity kills you. Taiichi Ono said, overproduction is the #1 cause of waste.
So when you're talking about overproduction, are you talking about it in an economic sense in terms of supply and demand and manufacturing things like cars, or are you talking about it in terms of software where you have too much stuff going into the front end, too much stuff being put onto the design team? There's just too much stuff trying to put through the system.
It's all the same. I mean, if the product manager is overproducing requirements, and I have 2 years of requirements sitting around, by the time I get to them, the 2 years stale, and now I have to rework them, and the work in making them was work wasted. If I make software that is never used, I still have to build it, I still have to test it, I still have to ship it. It still takes memory that the customer is paying for.
Okay, here's another question, which is an important one. So in my experience, I'm sure probably yours as well, again, with Anglo-Saxon, Western type software companies, everyone is always maxed out. Everyone's in back-to-back meetings. Really? Yeah, totally, yeah. I work a lot in the fintech space, so certainly that's true there. If you go into a typical Japanese company, are people more relaxed? Do they have more time to think? Are they more, is there a difference, or is it all the same?
At least the stereotype is that it's worse. I mean, people work very, very hard.
So it's going back to the process point. In theory, if those processes are working for the Japanese, your Japanese clients, the ones that you have experience with, they could be ported to a Western organization.
Well, it's not so much East versus West. What you need to do is find how to map those very deep cultural notions onto your development culture. Now, the question is, to what degree does the indigenous culture influence the development culture? And my experience has been not very much. I think it's more the environment and what the culture enables and rewards than it is anything in really, really deep culture. Is that these cultural norms set default behavior. But if I define a context and an environment that encourages, rewards, teaches other behaviors, that people can move into this very, very naturally. And I've seen this in Germany.
Okay. So just looking at the time, we probably need to be thinking about sort of bringing things to a bit of a close. I mean, are there any specific things that you would say we could identify to make things better?
Well, and I have a list of 4 things here, and I think I've mentioned them a little bit. And one is a total revamp of the CS curricula. I really think we're teaching the wrong things. We're teaching penmanship.
Just for the purposes of clarity, how do you define again penmanship?
So all you need to do to become a great poet is go to this penmanship school, and you'll be just fine. And I have this fear that that's what a lot of CS curricula are about, is they're doing the equivalent of the penmanship rather than producing people that are ready to go out and do what they need to do to be creative, effective professionals at developing software. And so, I mean, look, I've had academic duties at Flinders University in Adelaide, at University of Manchester in the UK, at the Free University of Brussels in Brussels, at North Central College in the United States. Been there, done that, bought the t-shirt. I know how these systems work. The Europeans are a little better than the Americans, but the Americans, it's really a lot to be ashamed of. So that's academia. Companies need to let go a little bit of the technology. Most software technologies are founded as technology companies, and the societal or business or whatever needs come secondary. And I think businesses need to be more attentive to their social responsibility. I mean, we're seeing this in American government right now, where, you know, big high tech is being called to account for what is viewed as monopolistic and anti-competitive behavior. I don't know if I agree with it, but kind of the mindset is headed in the right direction, is that they're looking beyond just the technical concerns and looking at broader societal concerns. And I think companies need to be doing this and asking themselves, why do we exist? And maybe remaking themselves. I mean, I know a company that used to make rubber boots and tires, and they started making cellular phones. Nokia was a rubber boot and tire company. So I think companies need to be thinking at that level of this re-becoming. Again, the thing I said, if there's one thing that your folks should remember from this, focus on the end user. So it should not be that the product manager is going down to the Gemba to see what the developers are doing. The product manager should be going down to the Gemba of the end user. My wife was working for a company once, and they had a company here called Oticon that makes hearing aids. And they went out to the end user to see how they were manufacturing these hearing aids. And the hearing aid travels from station to station in a small box, and each station does something to it. And at one of the stations, there was an ADM3A terminal, and there were Post-it notes all around the screen. And I said, what are these Post-it notes for? Oh, well, these tell me what direction to go and what command to enter when I'm at a certain stage of the process. Ding. You're not going to get that by inviting that person into your office and interviewing them. You got to see what they're doing.
Yeah.
And so I think developers need to have this too. To a large degree, you know, the product manager, product owner can act as a proxy, because you can't really have a developer crowd out there, you know, touring the whole Gemba. But there needs to be that connection, whatever it takes to sustain that connection.
Just to sort of look at that particular one in a bit more detail, and to help people who might be thinking about their own situation where things are not so simple. Let's imagine you're working in a software environment where you're developing a tool that will be used internally within that environment, like an analytics tool or something like that. There are no external customers, but it's a big company. There are a lot of users, and it's an important tool. So it's important that you actually understand how users will use the tool, right?
Yep.
Question, you have got a person who's a subject matter expert on the team whose job it is to harvest and understand requirements. Because that person, this is a real situation, because this person is supposed to be expert at that particular process. Turns out that person's never actually done that process. And what this person's been doing is sitting at his or her desk, making the stuff up. How do you solve a problem like that?
In Scrum, that's what Scrum Masters are for. And the Scrum Master will see that and scream bloody murder, make it visible. And now we'll fix the problem, either by educating that person, getting the person some help, replacing the person, doing whatever we need to do to fix that problem, make it visible. So Scrum's answer to that is the Scrum Master, the court jester, the person who can walk around and say, hey, the emperor is going mighty chilly this winter. Now, if you have that situation, everybody knows it, right?
Right.
But no one's saying it.
Yeah,
it's the Scrum Master's job to say it.
Do you think, this problem is so serious, and it's, when I say serious, that's the wrong word. It's such an important part of the success formula. Let me put it in a more positive way. That if you see something like that happening in your product team, for those that are listening, you've got to take action. Is that what you would recommend?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's a killer. This is why companies die.
Okay, great. Okay, that's very clear. Very clear. So the fourth point, the fourth of your pearls of wisdom for fixing this moving forward, what do you think? What's your opinion?
Is teamwork. And so again, it's this, there's a part of the Nonaka story I left out where he said that the work was overlapping. And actually it reminded him of pieces of sashimi on a bowl of rice, overlapping pieces of sashimi. And he said, what's the human equivalent of sashimi? And that's where the Scrum Rugby comes from.
Right.
So it's this sashimi thing, this near chaotic kind of interaction. That's teamwork. I mean, you cannot orchestrate or formulate, how a rugby team or a football team is going to move. And you have these play diagrams, right? They have the playbook, but no play exactly follows that playbook. And a lot of the spectacular plays have nothing to do with the playbook. They're created on the fly. And so what we need to do to be responsive to change is everybody needs to pivot. So what does it mean for development to pivot? Does it mean that one person pivots? Do they all pivot together? Who coordinates that pivoting, right? Is there a manager who's coordinating the pivoting? This is the one mind thing, where the whole team is one mind. And so to be able to pivot, to be able to respond to new understanding about the need to change a direction, the whole team needs to be on board to that. This, of course, requires communication, so co-location, frequent interaction. I like pair programming if people are changing pairing. This is one of the great things, great practices, I think, that came out of XP that does work. It's one of about two. So I'm really, really missing teamwork in the Agile Manifesto. This is another reason I like Scrum. This is much more explicit in Scrum. I mean, the whole name Scrum comes from this whole sashimi model and this notion of teamwork. So getting academia to flip its head, getting companies focused on, how are we contributing to quality of life? And the extension of that is focusing on the end user, and teamwork is how we fix things inside.
Right. So looking at that second point in a bit more detail, that the company's becoming, less tech focused. I mean, could you expand on what you mean by that? I mean, for example, going into a startup that's just raised 22 million, to develop some software to automate wedding photography or something, God knows what. And they're going to conquer the world and, become hugely successful, next unicorn. This company's on a mission. this company thinks it's the most important company in the world, and the product that it's building is fantastic. If you go into a large corporate, you have an executive team, they're all pressured, they're all incentivized, they've all got, stock options, they're all got big salaries. What message do you think needs to be given to those companies?
I like to tell a story. So Denmark is the #1 supplier of insulin to the world. Insulin, the patent was granted 100 years ago today.
Okay.
The company that invented insulin sold the patent for $1 because they felt that the benefit to society was worth it. Today, it costs about $500 for a 2-week supply of a single vial of insulin. We've lost something.
Yeah, I think many people would agree. Many people would agree. Okay, got it. On the team's point specifically, and trying to sort of, be pushing back a little bit in a polite way. The 12th thing on the 12 principles says, at regular intervals, the team, it mentions team, reflects on how to become more effective and then tunes and adjusts its behavior accordingly. I don't think too many people would disagree with that. Is the point you're making that no one's telling us how to get the team to be effective in the first place?
I mean, we could say whale instead of team, and the sense of the sentence wouldn't be changed because, okay, maybe we make a better whale and things are better. I mean, what is it we're focusing on here? I mean,
I see. I see what you're talking about. Team is a construct, a concept that applies to something else. And the thing that we should be focusing on isn't the team. The team just refers to it. We haven't defined what it is we're even talking about. Is that your point?
We have not defined teamwork.
Right. Okay, got it.
Or encouraged it. And we know this. I mean, there's tons of science. There's tons of folklore. There's tons of, things that people pull out of the dark recesses of the body that we know how to make this work. And this is the sashimi thing that makes it possible to pivot in Agile.
So we said that we're not going to be redoing this manifesto, and I'm quite sure no one wants that. But if I hypothetically crossed out that final one and I wrote another one and I said something like a constant and ongoing effort will be made to ensure that the team can reason with one mind, and evidence shall be sought that the team is indeed reasoning with one mind. Is that more getting to the point?
Yeah, that's getting to the point. For sake of digestibility, I'd probably try to find some phraseology that wouldn't use one mind, because that's a little too sappy for some people, but something more operationable. Something I can measure. I mean, I haven't jumped on you. I hate the term Agile Mindset. I'm having a big discussion on LinkedIn about this right now. This is not about changing mindset.
Have I mentioned?
You used the term 3 times.
Did I?
Yes, you used the term 3 times. I hate that term.
Sorry.
It's about mindset happens here. Agile happens here.
Right. Okay.
All right. And my concern is that, this one mind thing, people are going to have the same reaction to it that I do to mindset. That, no, come on, be real. This is about doing something. What do I need to do? How do I need to structure? What are the practices? What are the competencies? Tell me something I can do about this.
I get it. No, you're pushing it an open door, Jim. You really are. But going to the AM, I won't use the word because it annoys you so much. You just told me that. I can tell you, and you will know, you don't need me to tell you, lots of people will self-proclaim that they have an agile mindset. In fact, you can read job descriptions on LinkedIn today.
You think so?
That they require you to have an agile mindset.
Reading the job descriptions is is a real pleasure in entertainment. I mean, you read these Scrum Master descriptions and they're just laughable, right? Or, an agile transformation project with these benchmarks being set by our CEO and so forth, and being led by corporate. And
must have
really
agile mindset, or agile native, or agile centric.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's all meaningless. Okay, so this has actually been a really interesting, quite a lengthy conversation, Jim. Thank you so much indeed for allocating your Friday afternoon. I think cold beers are waiting both of us.
Yep.
Yeah, it's been lovely talking to you. I've learned a lot of things. You've made some fantastic points. And I guess all that remains is for me to thank you again and look forward to redoing this at some point in the future.
No, Andrew, I wish you a lot of luck taking this forward with my esteemed colleagues out there, who are very unlikely to agree with me on everything, and that's great. Maybe let me challenge you, and for the long future, after you've been around with these interviews, have a panel. And see if you can bring us all together for a day, and we can hash it out and maybe come to some point. I'm not asking for another manifesto, please. But
no, you won't get one.
1 point.
Yeah, you won't get one. But no, I think I'm a product guy, so I'm pretty good at bringing people together. Stakeholder management is one of the things that I'm supposedly pretty good at. So I will find a way of getting some common ground out of this, and I've already got some very good things down here. So some good meat. So yeah, let's look forward and plan on that basis, and let's keep in touch.
Okay, Andrew, you're great, and this is a great effort, a great service you're doing. I appreciate you very much for this, and hope that we can get together. Hope I can make it down to see you sometime. That'd be great.
I look forward to that.
Or if you come up this way, we have a guest room. You're more than welcome.
That's very kind of you. I might well take you up on that.
All right.
See you later, man.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye-bye.